We're back for another episode of Let's Talk Broncos. I didn't think we went live there. Thanks for the pause as I stared vehemently at the stream looking and we're live, so that's good. Bree Maestas, Joey Richards, Zach Seegers. Let's Talk Broncos. Obviously, there's a lot of needs going on. The Broncos aren't in the playoffs. We're watching a bunch of good football, but the Broncos aren't in it. What do they have to do to return to that platform? Because it's been more than a couple of years, and I think all of Broncos country is ready and raring to go. But they're going to need to make some changes. They're going to need to make some acquisitions. They're going to have to be in the hunt for just the right pieces that are going to make them eligible for that. Off screen, maybe the conversation is that it's not going to be next year that they see that resurgence. We're in a bit of a rebuild as we try to determine once again, or shall I say yet again, who the quarterback is going to be for the Denver Broncos. We don't have that answer. We don't even know how the coaching shakeup is going to unravel in the NFL. Obviously, the Broncos don't have to worry about that with Sean Payton at the helm. But guys, we have a lot of questions to answer, a lot of holes to plug. That's for you, Alex. Let's get straight into it. But first, I have to ask you, the preferred Kelsey brother has to be Jason Kelsey, right? Like nobody would vote for Travis.
By a mile. What's the I don't know what the debate is. I think Travis Kelsey's fine. I think he's one of the best tight ends in NFL history. Jason Kelsey's more likable, and he's not a division rival. Easy layup buckets.
I personally feel like it's not even a question. This is the one thing I won't argue with Zach about. Pretty much that's how very stamped this is. It's Jason Kelsey all day. Travis Kelsey can't hold a candle to to Jason. He can't do it.
Good. I just wanted to confirm my biases. I didn't want to even elicit a fight, and I'm glad that you guys chose to be amicable because I know the rest of the night will not go as swimmingly. Let's jump right into what some of the biggest needs are. I'm going to go with the under the radar one because I don't think it's that high up on many priority lists, and I'm not ranking it as number one. I am ranking it as there's a big question mark at tight end. There was a big question mark to start the season. There's a big question mark to end the season. We have no idea whether or not Greg Dulcich will get the opportunity to prove that he's ready to come back from multiple hamstring injuries, a foot injury, etc. I think that we can explicitly say that if a lot of targets are going to Adam Troutman, there's a problem along the offense, not a problem with Adam Troutman, but there's probably a need for more tight end depth. It's not the sexiest choice here, but I do think that it's appropriate to point out that it is a need. And Joey will be watching the draft heavily, maybe not specifically just for tight ends, but I'm going to ask that you list that on your roster as you're watching.
Bree, and you know what's crazy about this? At the Senior Bowl, both sides, East and West, will be coached by a Broncos coach. So at the Senior Bowl, so the Broncos will get a close, very very uphand and personal view of the Senior Bowl tight ends this year, which will be interesting. I wouldn't be shocked at all if the Broncos went tight end at some place in the draft. One of these guys we see at the Senior Bowl, for sure.
Everybody wave to Pat.
And also, I'll add on to your point, though, Bree. Broncos do need a tight end. They need a pass-catching tight end in particular, I think, is what's going on here. That's kind of the void that Greg Dulcich left open with his injuries. And as you mentioned, it's kind of hard to bet on the guy at this point. That hamstring just seems like a mess. He can't get that under control. Zach, what did the doctor say about it again? What was all the stuff that happened with the hamstring?
They looked into making him change his gait, change the way he ran, because they had a feeling that maybe that was part of the reason he was having these chronic hamstring problems. It's insane. It's awful. I'm concerned about Greg Dulcich. Adam Troutman, who's probably kind of became the number one option in that room this season, is an unrestricted free agent, and the Broncos aren't super flush with cash. The room right now is Chris Manhertz and Nate Adkins. And then even Michael Burton, I know he's a fullback, but you can use those guys in similar ways in terms of stacking them off the line or chipping, whatever. We saw the Ravens just do that with Patrick Ricard, for example. Michael Burton, also a free agent this year. So it's just, I don't know. It's a little messy. Those body types, it's Chris Manhertz and Nate Adkins, and that's it. Outside of, and then huge question mark on Greg Dulcich with his hamstring. It's absolutely one of the biggest needs.
You're conveniently erasing Kroll from the entire conversation, for shame.
Yeah, Kroll did actually show a little something while he played. I thought he looked okay in his time. Not the most productive, but I think there might be more there. Like, I wouldn't cut him. I think he's an interesting player to have on the team. Probably not your one starting option. Like the tight end, Bree, is definitely still a need to what you said.
When you're saying production, though, and you're saying like anybody having efficiency, I mean, on the offense, everyone was kind of low on that radar. There was just a given general assumption with that offense from the Broncos. Patrick Kyoto said, could definitely see Troutman brought back on a cheaper deal just to have him in-house as a backup plan. And Kroll is going to be a dog. That's DAWG.
Yeah, Kroll is under contract for next year. Pretty good deal. They've got him like near the veteran minimum. And they've got no money tied to him. They could cut him in camp if he's disappointing, and it won't be an issue at all. It's a good deal.
Zach, numbers guy. Samuel Castro wants to know, how much money do the Broncos have for the free agent market?
I mean, that's a good question. Right now, negative $23.5 million. I want to be clear. That has nothing to do with the Russell Wilson move. That is, where it's going to be at, no matter what they do with Russ Wilson, unless they do a pre-June cut, in which case it's going to escalate by 50 million. So they'll be like negative 75 in the red. It's super scary, and I get that. They can free that up pretty easily with like a couple moves that I would be stunned if they don't happen. Cutting Tim Patrick, for example, cutting DJ Jones, moving on from DJ Jones in some sort of way, and then trading Jerry Jeudy. I think all three of those things probably happen. That'll get the Broncos 10 million over. I think realistically, it's probably going to be like 15, 20 mil. Maybe they restructure and get, aggressive with pushing money off into the future, which I think makes sense. The Broncos cap health is excellent down the road. Part of the thing with drafting really poorly is you don't have a lot of players you want to pay a lot of money to. So the cap health going forward is great. So it kind of makes sense to kick some of those cap problems down the road. Generously, like 20 mil. They're going to be very sparse in free agency this year, as they should be. It was a mistake to spend as much as they did last offseason, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would say probably. I still think that the idea that they had going into it was okay. I think what failed them, like if I take Mike McGlinchey out of that free agent class, am I really frowning on the free agent class, I guess, is what I would say. And what failed them was every decision before. Why are we not drafting and developing offensive linemen at all? Why are we okay putting a Band-Aid at right tackle every single year? And that's just something that stopped last year. They're like, we don't want to do this anymore. We're going to try to find a guy that can fill this for a while. And Mike McGlinchey's not that great, but guess what, guys? When you're at that level of a tackle, starting level tackle, and you hit free agency, you're going to get paid a shit ton. That just is what it is, because there's such a deficiency at that position in the league. There's just not a ton of them. But yeah,
he was good in the run game.
What was that?
And he was good in the run game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he kind of fit the identity of what they were trying to build. Can I expound on your tight ends, though, Bree? I think as a team need, I'm going to you're kind of focused on that one position. I'm going to move out of focus more to a broad point and just say anybody that is a difference maker catching the football. I'm not just talking about wide receiver, tight end. I'm not talking about, hey, I'm cool with Sutton or Jerry Jeudy 700 yards. I'm talking about an actual difference maker. I'm talking about a guy that can get me 1,000 yards in a season, whether that be at tight end or wide receiver. It's important. I think the Broncos need to figure that out. I think it makes it really tough on everybody involved when you don't have that 1A guy on the Broncos right now. And they don't. We were in the group chat talking about, and on the last podcast talking about, like, while it feels Courtland Sutton had this tremendous season, I think he did have a tremendous season. And while it feels like Jerry Jeudy had the worst season, production wise, very, very similar, right? Very, 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 very similar.
Almost identical.
Almost identical. Like that year is not going to get it done from the Broncos perspective. I don't think so. And I think the quarterback did play a part in that. But overall, I don't think Sutton or Judy is going to any other team and is going to be their 1A. That's just not how I'm evaluating at this point in their career. Broncos need to find that guy. And luckily, the wide receiver draft is getting very deep and everything like that. You know, if the Brock Bowers falls to the Broncos in the first round, that would be tremendous. Something like that. But they need to figure out who is the lead dog in this room at some point.
Patrick Coyote, Coach Patty says use LJ Little Jordan Humphrey as a hybrid TE more. I'm sorry, I'm like Ron Burgundy and I'll read everything like it's typed. Patrick, I think Zach likes that idea. Zach, how do you feel about it?
I do. Well, just get creative with trying to find weapons. I fully agree with everything Joey said. This offense is so low wattage right now. Javonte Williams was a difference maker, and I think, you know, I'm still not out on Javonte Williams. It's a little sentimental maybe, but I'm hopeful another year removed from that gruesome injury, maybe he gets back to form. That said, I'd say even running backs in need. I think you maybe need to maybe like a late round investment, but I would maybe take a bite at the apple at just like, let's see if we can find, now you have such little draft capital. Maybe it's more an undrafted option, but I don't know.
Well,
I wouldn't feel super amped about going into next season with just this running back room, Pirine and McLeod, whatever, not to go down that road. You just need difference makers on offense. You need like everywhere. I think that's true at running back. I think that's true at wide receiver. I think that's true at tight end. I feel like Joey's probably going to rebut my running back point. Imagine this team with a Jahmyr Gibbs. And I'm not saying draft him in the first round, but like we can debate that draft value all day long and positional value and blah, 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 blah. It would be nice to just have a guy that can make plays with the football in his hands. Sam Laporta, you know, like, I don't know. Draft someone who can make a difference. And this year is stacked with wide receivers. I would go there. Brock Bowers in the first round doesn't excite me a ton, but I also can't deny the talent. Get a weapon. We were talking about what we think our biggest needs are. For me, it's weapons. The offensive line, by just about every metric, and I think the metrics we currently have devised to like measure offensive line output are deeply flawed. That said, every metric we have points to this offensive line actually being one of the better lines in the league, a top 10, maybe even top 5 line. I think that's only going to get better with another year working together, another year under Zach Strief. Yes, you need to address center. That's another big need. But invest in this offense, set it up for the quarterback of the future, and get weapons, get playmakers. This team is probably not going to find their quarterback of the future this year. Maybe they hit on something magical in the second round or at pick 12, but more realistically than not, that's probably not happening this year. The second best thing they can do, and also look at the limited resources in free agency. Going forward, they'll have resources to maybe find the quarterback of the future. This year, set it up for that guy. Make it so it's not another Drew Lock situation where we're wasting 3 years blaming the surroundings.
I do want to point out, though, that I think that a little bit of creative play calling could be a solution. I don't necessarily think the talent is completely devoid of being a little more exciting. I think that that could be maybe. I know Patrick has a point of using certain guys to their skill strengths. Gap scheme runs for Javonte, since that's more of his strength. I like your point about Javonte Williams needing a little bit more time. He obviously returned way early, way more than anticipated, but I don't think feeling 100% is the same as performing at 100% or past that point. So I could see where there's kind of a perfect storm of that. I worry that plugging and playing the best wide receiver you can get in the draft is still not going to kind of change what the play calling was until the perfect pairing between quarterback and target are married on the field there. So I guess I just wanted to throw that, not wrench, just question mark.
I will say, I really do think, like, I've been seeing, and So first, I'm going to go to Bree's point, and then I'm going to go to Zach's point about quarterback, if that's okay with everybody here.
Before you get to quarterback, could we talk about Bree's thing a little bit? Because I have something there too. But go ahead.
We can do that. Here's the thing that I think. I keep seeing online, like it feels like any quarterback with like any sort of athleticism whatsoever is being thrown out the window for the Broncos because the idea is that Sean Payton can't work with these guys. And this would be my point. I think we're completely missing how, like, what plays you could call with Russell Wilson at quarterback. You're wiping out sections of your playbook, is what I would say. If you want to play to strengths, right? Because what can Russell Wilson not do? There's a lot that he can't do. He can't throw over the middle of the field. I don't really think he can navigate a pocket very well. Like, his quick game's not all up to par at all. And it's hard to develop a playbook and play call for such an offense that if you are playing to strengths, I'm putting my playbook is getting wiped out, and it's hard to call plays for somebody like that, is what I would say. It just is. It's hard to do that. And I think when you see Russell Wilson go to a new team, you're going to see a similar styled offense to what Sean Payton ran this year. You're going to see that no matter where he goes, because these NFL offensive coordinators and NFL play callers are good. They're not going to ask him to throw over the middle of the field or do some of these other things that Sean Payton did call sometimes and Russell Wilson missed, but it was called, I think, less frequently than he usually would. Zach, what do you have to say?
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with that point. I think, personally, I think Sean Payton did a good job. I do think the roster is pretty devoid of talent. Like, I really like Brandon Johnson. I think he should be a role player, but he's like second on the team in touchdowns, you know? Like, Adam Troutman was a huge receiving piece in this team, and we're talking about bringing him back for a cheaper year so he can be a backup earlier in the show. You know, like all the receiving stats. Samaje Perine was the most efficient down-to-down receiver on this team. Like, so I do think there were serious talent deficiencies in terms of the weapons that kind of handcuffed the coach, as well as the quarterback itself. And excuse me, I knocked something over. But I think I still have faith in Sean Payton because you can see the plays that are there to be made, and they're just not being made by the talent that's currently in place. It's not like, oh my God, what is this design? And it's also not that he is, I know, Zach, you're muted, and Zach Butterfinger Seegers over here. But it's not like he was an elite coordinator this year. I don't think it was like he was running circles around everyone, but I also don't see anything from his performance this year that makes me think he's holding talent back. I think he maximized what was there for him. Joey talked about like the areas of the field thing. 32nd in using the first 20 yards of the field, right? They're fifth in deep balls. They're 20th or 32nd in using those first 20 yards of the field. And then I think they're like first in throws behind the line of scrimmage. That's a hard way to build an offense, especially in the meta of 2024, where what's every defense doing? Trying to do the Fangio thing or the Robert Saleh thing, like two different ways of kind of getting to the same answer of these conservative shell coverages that put a roof on an offense and make it hard to go deep. When did that start coming into vogue? 2020. When did Russell Wilson's career nosedive? 2020. That's not coincidence. Like, I don't know. It could continue to look ugly next year. I think what we saw with Jarrett Stidham in the offense demonstrated that it was more than just a Russell Wilson problem. The fact it was so similar, I think, suggests a lot of it was a Russell Wilson problem. But I don't know. I am pretty optimistic Sean Payton will take whatever quarterback and get the most out of them. Maybe that's not a great product, but again, looking at his track record over his like entire career, or at least the last like 20 years of his track record, that's what it suggests to me.
Yeah. Zach, can you repeat? Or actually, I'll just throw it out there. Are you guys okay with me moving on to a new strength? Or
only no, because you asked. Yes, Joey, please.
Okay. I think this is the most obvious one, in my opinion, and it's quarterback. I think quarterback is the most obvious need for the Broncos this year, and Zach kind of put it right into my court here, saying that you think that Sean Payton will get the most out of the next quarterback. So, yeah, I think it's quarterback. It's quarterback all day. We just made this whole argument about how Russell Wilson was limiting the offense, and I think it's important that the Broncos go out there and get a quarterback that isn't. It's the most important position on the field. These – and I get it from a Broncos fan's perspective where it's like, man, all these analysts, all they do is talk about quarterbacks all day long. And it sucks because I would love to talk about defensive tackles more or interior defensive line and how the Broncos should try to get tougher up the middle. But at the end of the day, the most important position, and isn't even close, is quarterback. And until the Broncos figure that out, it's going to be hard to be a sustained winner. So that's something that they need to figure out. And I think that this year they should be looking for that guy. I don't think it's draft quarterback no matter what, but they should most definitely be looking for that guy. And if they find a guy they like, throw all the resources possible to go and get him.
Yeah. For me in the timeline right now, I think it's great. And yes, if you love a guy in the draft that guy. That is the number one rule of drafting. If you love a quarterback and that quarterback's available to you, draft him. I don't care if you have Patrick Mahomes on the roster. Like maybe you have an awesome backup and then you can parlay that guy into picks. It's like, if you love a quarterback, draft the quarterback. For me, I'm putting quarterback a bit on the back burner this year. Maybe they love JJ McCarthy. And if they think JJ McCarthy is the future franchise answer and they draft him at 12, great. But I think more realistically than not, I think the hype on this quarterback class, at least on the top end of it, is a little out of whack right now, in my opinion, at least. I think there's like 3 really good guys, maybe 2 really good guys. And I think there's a couple like late first, early second round guys that are kind of getting, like Michael Penix, for example. I do not see, he's been getting talked about as a top 20 pick all year. I think when it's all said and done, he's going to go sometime on day 2. I don't know. I'm not in love with the quarterback class right now. And again, if that's how it works out, fine. You have so few assets right now. You're drafting after all these quarterbacks are supposed to go, and trading up kind of looks off the table because the teams picking 1, 2, 3 all have pretty clear needs at quarterback. So I don't know.
Here's what I would say though, Zach. Like, I think once you get past that top, I would say 6 range, in any quarterback class, you're going to find guys with clear deficiencies, and you're going to have to try to figure it out from there. The Broncos drafting an tight end or serious receiving rep, and I know how much you didn't think Russell Wilson added to the offense and how much even better Jacoby Brissett or someone like that could be in this offense. If the Broncos get better, it's going to just get harder to find quarterback. At some point, you're going to have to draft one of these guys, Zach, that is going to have a deficiency, whether you like it or not, because if they didn't, they would be going top 3. That it's just like Jaden Daniels has serious deficiencies, and I think he's going to go 3rd. I would be shocked if he fell out of the top 5. And I'm not all the way sold in on him. Like that's just kind of how the quarterback position works. You're going to, if you want to draft a quarterback, you're going to have to draft them way above where they're evaluated, unless you have a top 3 pick.
I think that's, yes, there's some truth to that. You do have to overdraft the guy. I don't buy into the fact that like this is the easiest time to get a quarterback. They could easily lose more games next year. Easily. Like that's not that far-fetched. They were 3-8 outside of their insane turnover stretch this year. So like number one, I'd point to that. Number 2, they're going to have draft capital moving forward. So that'll make it easier. It'll also be easier. I'd say 3rd, it'll be easier for them to sacrifice that draft capital moving forward because the roster won't be in the dire position it's in right now. Right now, the idea of trading up, and I agree, you do it if you love a guy, but the idea, like I'm gritting my teeth a little bit. I'm white knuckling that trade because it's like, ooh, this roster's deficient. We need picks to fix it because we have no money and we're giving up a bundle of picks to try. We better be really right on this quarterback. Moving forward, that gamble, I think it's a lot easier to swallow. You also suddenly have money, which opens up the veteran market, which is currently not really an option to the Broncos. I think it's easier for me to buy into the fact that this is one of the harder years for them to find a quarterback than it being an easier one. Yes, maybe they also do better and their draft position is a little worse. The Chiefs drafted Patrick Mahomes as a playoff team and the Bills drafted Josh Allen as a playoff team.
I agree with you. I think but it seems like here's where we're going to differ is the only reason it's easier because the Broncos have draft picks and you're saying that it would be easier to trade up. It's not going to be easier to draft a quarterback at 12. It won't be easier to draft a quarterback at 10. It won't be I think that what you're kind of getting here would be average for a quarterback class at 12th. I think a JJ McCarthy-esque player may even be more have its upsides more than your average draft class when you're going to the 12th pick. I think you're talking about a 20-year-old prospect that is a winner. Like there's a million things you can talk about JJ McCarthy for, and this isn't the draft show, so I won't get into it. But I think that is pretty much the only reason as to why. I think this quarterback class, honestly, between Penix, Nix, McCarthy, some of these other guys, has more depth than in that range. From 12th pick to day 2 than your average draft class all day long. That's just something I would say.
I agree, but to throw it back to Wad, and I'll get it out of this conversation and throw it to you, Bree, but to throw it back to Wad, something I know we talked about there. I don't care about the depth of a quarterback class. That's not what matters to me a ton. I care about the top end talent or the depth of the top end talent in this class. And I do think there's a pretty severe drop off after the top 3. Okay. I'm done.
Yeah, that would be my point though. It's like, you just want to trade up in the top 3 every year. Like how anyway, is what at the top pick, it won't be any easier. I don't think, I guess, but go ahead.
I didn't want to step in between you guys as you were waffling through these ideas because there's a lot of directions that the team could go. There's even a conversation that they could trade back and potentially, marinate a quarterback behind a vet. I think the idea that the Broncos are, Coop said, let them fight. I was letting them fight. They conceded on their own. They took this upon themselves. But the idea that you could bring in a vet, plug a later round quarterback behind that vet, there's a lot of different ways in which the team could kind of go about this. Do you honestly think the Broncos would draft a quarterback at 12? Could they potentially trade back? Like, give me your gut sense and feeling of where they would go if they stayed put. Doesn't have to be long and involved, but there's a couple of ideas of, I don't like the idea of trying to draft somebody right ahead that's going to somehow fix all of the other issues on this roster, because I feel like there's a foundation that needs to be laid for any sort of long-term success. So you mock the idea of Drew Lock being an issue. It'd be beyond entertaining that if he's the veteran that Sean Payton wants to work with in order to plug a drafted QB behind so that he has time to percolate and actually become something. The Broncos aren't looking at winning next season. They're not looking at winning for the next 2 seasons unless they somehow win the lottery. Martin and Zula over on YouTube is saying, you can't win the lottery if you don't play. I don't think that's necessarily the same with quarterbacks. Joey has a great point where you could swing away, and still some of the best performing quarterbacks didn't come at 1 or 2. And I'm looking at Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold as a great representation of that. So let's talk about gut feeling. What do the Broncos do with their first pick? Is it 12? Is it later? Is it QB? Is it not?
I would say that with their first pick, I know there's a lot of cornerbacks mocked to the Broncos. I would be shocked if that were the case, just because I think it would be really hard. Like, I think you have to kind of put in perspective as you being in a coach's perspective for a second. And Vance Joseph just put a pick in Riley Moss last year. How can you then vouch for? Yeah, how can you then vouch for? I need a first round corner this year opposite Patrick Surtain when you just got a guy who then you traded up for in Riley Moss last year. That would be hard as a coach to vouch for without saying, hey, I really screwed up here. So I have a hard time imagining that be the case. Honestly, if I were a betting man, and I have almost tweeted this before, and I will say this, but if I were a betting man and the Broncos do stay put at 12, I think they go offensive line. I think that's something that if you were to look at Sean Payton's history as a head coach and as a drafter, that would make sense. He's huge into putting resources into his offensive line. You saw it this last offseason, Mike McGlinchey and Ben Powers. And guess what, guys? You don't like that Mike McGlinchey contract? Garrett Bowles is up after the season. You're going to have to go back to the well and try to develop a guy there. I have a hard time arguing, and I know some people will be like, but what about first-year production? Ultimately, the Broncos got entirely lucky having no serious injuries on their offensive line throughout the entire season last year. This tackle would probably play in year one at some point. And secondly, you would be saving yourself a shit ton of money in year two when it's time for Garrett Bowles to go by and you have to replace one of the most expensive positions in the league. So I would personally say tackle. And then also, honestly, do you guys like Zach Strief? Did you guys think that he had a good first year? Yeah,
he was great.
I think that's another reason as to why I would feel comfortable drafting offensive line in year one. And I ultimately think that if they stay put at that pick, my betting odds would be on offensive line.
Well, you can't just pluck them off a tree. Patrick Kyoto makes a great point here that there's an offensive line development problem across the league, and it's pretty concerning. Also, selfishly plugging his podcast. There's a good rant over on his show if you want to check it out over on Let's Ride. Zach, how about you? Where do you think that falls? Would you go? Where does the gut fall? You can answer either way.
It's funny. I kind of am going the opposite direction of JR a little bit. I don't see it being offensive line. I think it's going to be like their needs, and yes, they have long-term needs at tackle, and I would not be mad if they ultimately went that way. And Sean's draft history does point to that. He's drafted. I was just trying to tally up the numbers. I'll finish tallying up the defensive side of the spectrum after
I was doing that.
But since joining the Saints, they spent 5 first-round picks on offensive line pieces. They spent 3 on weapons, but then he leaves and they draft Chris, or actually that was also the Penning one. So I would say like 4.5 and 3.5, because the Penning pick is kind of in line with, again, he's worked so closely with Mickey Loomis that I do think the Saints moves post Peyton can kind of, I don't think they're that far removed from Peyton's train of thought, at least. I would count it as 3 and 4, or like 3.5 and 4.5. Point being, he's also invested in weapons fairly highly here. He took a running back 2nd overall. So I do think because he saw like the potential for that being a special weapon, he traded up to draft Alvin Kamara when that was when he took Alvin Kamara, that pick was graded pretty horribly because you're trading up for a running back and you already have plenty of weapons. This is just like a Sean Payton luxury pick. When he sees a weapon he likes and he wants a weapon, he's going to get that guy. Yes. And more often than not, he's right. I think he's going to draft a weapon. Maybe I'm being led by some bias because that's what I really want him to do. I'll Babe Ruth call my shot right here. So we have a cool clip in April if it ends up happening. Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU. That's my prediction. Right now. Crazy athletic wide receiver. Why not? I do think cornerback's a good chance, though. That would be my number 2 prediction, just because there's so much smoke there right now. I don't want it to happen. I'd be very upset, but I just.
Do you want to give your option C too? Do you possibly have a backup plan to your backup plan?
Trade back. I think it's trade back after that all day. And honestly, I
want him to trade back.
Like if the Broncos can trade back and get more top 100 picks in this scenario, unless one of those targets, like Zach was saying that he wants, I would also want one of those guys. And I'm speaking to Adunze, Malik Neighbors, Brock Bowers, Marvin Harrison Jr. is not falling that low, obviously, but like one of these type of guys falls there. It's almost, for me, it's pretty much, from what I've seen so far, I need to get closer into the edge class, but from what I've seen, it would be one of those guys, tackle or trade back. Those are like the only three options that I would be like hyped for.
I'll also say for people that care about like drafting positional value or whatever, like I kind of do, I like what Sean Payton's doing here. He has done nothing in the first round outside of pick like offensive weapons, defensive backs, offensive linemen, or defensive linemen.
What?
And if I'm being honest, that's where I want my picks spent. Like spend them on cornerbacks, spend them on defensive linemen, spend them on offensive linemen, spend them on wide receivers, and spend them on quarterbacks. Like
Okay.
That's where I want them.
But
Ideally, yes, there's exceptions to the rule, Joey.
No, I'm not saying there's even exceptions. He's drafted like 2 centers, 2 running backs in the first round. Like,
1 running back, okay, and I would say 2005 NFL was a different world. I would criticize drafting Reggie Bush at 2. Yes, I was trying to be a little nice there, but he is a different weapon and all that. He was viewed very. This was viewed like Daniel Jeremiah says that Reggie Bush was the best player period he ever scouted. So there is some special asterisks there. And then yes, he did draft 2 centers, but he drafted those guys at like the end of the first round. That's a little different to me, but fair. I can tell Bree's done with us.
I'm beyond done. I've been done. This is year 2.5 of done. Jacobs is moving on to my next point. It's a great segue to do so. I'm obviously joking every time I make some snippy remark like that. I'm not that terribly sad to be here. He said, I feel like the edge isn't brought up. Well, you're in luck. Jacobs, we're going to have a lot of coverage covering the pass rushers because I think there's an idea that edge is a big hole to fill. But I want to get into this one, and then I have one other question for y'all. So tackle how you feel about edge being an issue there.
Go ahead, Zach. I'll let you take it first.
I mean, it is an issue. It's just, it's a complicated issue because they need like a high-end talent there. That's what they need. Their depth at the room is actually pretty solid, and they're not set to lose anyone from it this year even. So they've got like pretty awesome depth and youth at the edge position, all coming back for another season of development. Yes, development isn't linear, but these are young, promising, talented pieces we've seen improve a little bit incrementally. Maybe Browning's not becoming the superstar we all wanted, but I'm optimistic there. That said, as we've talked about often on the show, it seems like they've got a lot of Robins, and having 3 Robins is great, or 4 Robins, however many they end up having. That's awesome. That's a lot of Robins. You've got like a pretty good Batman team there, if you can find a Batman. And that's what they're still missing. They don't have like an elite dude. If Jared Verse somehow ended up falling down the board, and the wide receivers are off the board, and the quarterbacks are off the board, and there's no really good trade back calls, I'd be totally fine with that pick. I could absolutely live with that.
Interesting. Yeah, like I was just about to bring this up. I think there's a good chance that Verse is on the board, Zach, if I'm being honest with you. I would say that there's not a bad chance of that happening. I think Latu, yeah, he says it right here. His medicals are a little so that's something that the staff would have to evaluate, but I think off the film, he's a great talent. Like I said, I need to get closer into the edges. I'm kind of trying to start with the interior defensive linemen. Guys, there's not a lot, and that freaks me out. There's not a lot of those 300-pound guys that I'm looking for up front. So, yeah, I don't know. I'll give a shout-out to Darius Robinson, though. That's a guy I love, man, from Mizzou. And I can't wait to see him at the Senior Bowl. He's a specimen. I'm really looking forward to
him. Joey will be out at the Senior Bowl, and he wants to know if he can pick you guys up anything while he's out there. I want to talk the last bit, if we don't have other additions, about the idea of trading. Trading picks, trading players. The offseason needs to be of bountiful moves that ensure the ability to make moves in the future. Agree or disagree?
Agree, of course.
Yeah, I agree.
No. All right. Well, who gets traded? Who's on the block? the block?
I would say one of the wide receivers.
I think
Could
it's got to be
probably
Judy.
I think either or could be moved.
I
Do you think both?
I don't
Maybe.
think I don't think so. I think it's going to be, and I'll happily be wrong here. I would be very surprised if Sutton gets traded, and I would be very surprised if Judy doesn't get traded. I'd be surprised on both accounts of that flipping in any way. Judy, like the Broncos need to free up money. As we talked about earlier in this very show, they're currently $20 million over the cap. They have to do some things to free up money, and they're kind of limited in what they can do to free up money. Even though the dead cap would have been bigger, it would have been easier to free up or cut Russ last year because they had more avenues to like free up that money. One of the very few avenues, or like two of the few avenues they have to like free up real money, is like restructuring Courtland Sutton and trading Jerry Jeudy. You free up no money by cutting Jerry Jeudy. That's a tougher contract to really maneuver. Actually, you can't restructure it. You'd have to extend him. Yeah. Courtland Sutton's contract is much easier to maneuver, and there's much less upside in terms of cutting it or trading it. Jeudy is a move that frees up more money, and I think given what we saw this year is probably the piece you're more willing to move anyways.
Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with you, but I just think that there's more to get for Sutton than there is Jeudy, possibly, which would maybe lead me to trading Sutton. Like that would kind of be my argument. Like if the Jeudy isn't garnering much in trade, like he was at the trade deadline, so maybe that carries over, and that would be big. Like Jeudy was, who was it who offered a third for Jeudy per Adam Schefter? I don't remember. Some team did. No, I think it was I don't remember what team did, but a team offered a third for Jerry Jeudy, and the Broncos said no at the trade deadline. Maybe that's still out there, but maybe it's gotten worse. Maybe that third's not out there this offseason. Teams are looking at the draft and being like, I can go get a guy that has had or we think can produce as much as Jerry Jeudy at this point. And I mean, if we were to poll Broncos country and say who's the better wide receiver, Courtland Sutton or Jerry Jeudy, I would think about 90% of people would say Courtland Sutton. Ultimately, probably gets traded for more, I would say. So I think that the only reason I would throw that out there is because the Broncos do need picks as well. Another way of saving money is replacing these guys with cheap talent, which is draft picks. So that's something that I would say to go along with it. Maybe even both. I would kind of be shocked if it were both, but one of the two for sure, probably Jeudy, but I wouldn't be shocked if it was Sutton.
That's a good case. I stand by my take, but I think that's the world where it would be reversed.
I love it. Anything else from the two of you before we get out of here on this lovely Monday? There are questions about Tim Patrick. Like, what happens there? What's the move there?
He's going to be cut. I'd say almost certainly. It's so hard to imagine him being traded. His cap hit's so big. It's so hard to imagine him being brought back. And they can free up a lot of money by cutting him. So I think step one that this would be more surprising than anything with Sutton and Jeudy. I think step one, Tim Patrick's getting cut. Now what may happen is they might bring him back on a cheaper deal, like Coyote's talking about or has been talking about in the comments. I think that's very possible. I don't think Tim Patrick's market league wide is going to be that big. The Broncos doctors will know his situation better than anyone else. I do think Sean Payton liked him a ton throughout training camp, given all the reports that were coming out about Tim Patrick. Prior to his injury, the Broncos will need cheap weapons, and this is a cheap weapon that is familiar with the team, that they love, that is familiar with the offense. Like it checks a lot of boxes. So I think there's a good chance he's brought back. Just no way on that contract. The one other thing I wanted to add that you were alluding to earlier, Bree, other trade candidates, DJ Jones, I think is a likely one. I think he's probably cut or traded. Trade obviously ideal because then you're getting picks like Joey mentioned. They need those. Alex Singleton, maybe. I doubt there's any market there for it, but they kind of need to free up some money. And again, that's one avenue to do so. That one would be more surprising, but maybe that comes up. I think that's probably it. Maybe Greg Dulcich. or like Damari Mathis if someone wants a reclamation project and the Broncos are done. But I think
Joey's
those are
face.
like, and those would be like 6th, 7th round picks. Like but that's kind of, I think that's probably the list of like Garrett Bowles. Maybe that's like a really far out one. I'd say that's unlikely. But
I don't know.
Wow.
I wouldn't be
After all the
Proves
praise
up-
you gave him in the last podcast is what I guess if he
well, he's
been able to climb back up into like being worth more than his contract would. I mean, there was a question of whether or not they were upside down, and now he's done a pretty decent job, I guess. But then what are you going to do at left tackle?
I would bring him back. I'm not arguing for the move, but you can free up 20 million by moving on. And he, like, one thing we know about Garrett Bowles is that he's a difficult negotiator, right? The Broncos tried to restructure with him last offseason, a move that would have just given Garrett Bowles money up front. They weren't going to take any money out of his pocket. They were just going to give him money up front, commit to him more long-term. And Garrett Bowles didn't like how restructuring his contract sounded or the optics around it. So he said no to millions of dollars cash up front. Like, he is a difficult person to negotiate with and a kind of like stubborn individual, where you might really want him back. But to your point, Bree, he just played to a point where now maybe he's got some leverage. Now maybe he's valuable. And not only that, but he's gone after 2024, I think so, or maybe it's 2025, but he's got an extension looming. So you might have to be negotiating with him. And maybe you don't like how those negotiations are going, and you go, hey, we've got a pretty dang good starting left tackle. That's worth a 1st round pick, or at the very least a top 40, top 50 pick. Let's go see what we can get with this.
I made a face for the opposite reason of Bree, because I thought you were underselling the possibility of that. I think that it's, I wouldn't say likely, but I would say like up there. I think that that's something that could.
I thought you were making a face at Mathis. I thought
that
was like
that one too. That one I was thinking better luck to him, man. It's for Mathis.
Yeah, no, that would be. That's
Bulls,
a long shot.
I was thinking that one, because you put the prerequisite to it where it was like, this might be, I think that one's kind of likely, or not likely, but could happen for sure, just because I think we're kind of looking at this wrong, where we also have to be looking at who's going to get us picks in trades. And the Broncos don't have a lot of players on their team that are going to give them anything valuable in picks. Bowles is one of the guys that a team could be like, we need a left tackle and we're a championship caliber team. I could see a team trading a good pick for Garrett Bowles and the Broncos pulling the trigger there. Why not? Like, I think it's not all about next year for this Broncos team. And if it's a 1-year rental or a 2nd round pick, I think the Broncos might take 2nd round pick.
There's a sweet spot, though, because you can't mortgage everything off for hopes of a return in your future. That is scaring the hell out of me. I think we've depressed half the people in here.
Yeah,
I think it's concerning, but to Joey's point about Zach Strief, I think you feel fairly confident maybe about your ability to replace Garrett Bowles. And I would also say you do have to, I think, get maybe more than just like a run-of-the-mill 2nd round pick, because if you do just let him walk, you're getting a 3rd, 1,000%. So I do think like top 40, top 50 at the worst, like you have to be getting a quality pick there, because like, yes, this is a team that needs picks now, so there is some value to moving those up rather than waiting for the compensatory formula and yada yada. But man, they do need talent. I do think you saw the Bears defense run into some serious like stunted development problems from trading Roquan Smith, and I don't think they've gotten necessarily good ROI on that move. There is something to be said about like keeping your foundational building blocks, because you do need them, and a good NFL player can be around 5, 6, 7 years. They can have a fairly long window. So I see both sides of it. I would lean maybe more towards keeping Bowles, but I wouldn't be surprised if they trade him ultimately.
Coop said I'm dead inside, impossible to depress me. So never mind. I feel fine about it. I bid you adieu. We'll be back on Wednesday with the That's Good Broncos crew. And yeah, it's a pleasure talking Broncos with y'all. We'll leave you with the rest of your evening. And there's a weekend of football coming up. Like and subscribe to the channel.
Like and subscribe to the pod.
Like and subscribe to the podcast right now. And if you haven't voted for us over on Twitter, go do that. I think it's probably still in the description. Has it expired?
Oh, the poll's over. The poll's over. Funny story about that. We perfectly tied. We tied exactly for first. Had the exact same number of votes.
All right.
So
well,
do better next time, everybody.
You all disappoint me. Goodbye.